Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to the Biblical Perspective. We're right at smack dab in the middle of November 2021. Matter of fact, it's November the 13th. Happy anniversary to Matt and Libby Wright. That's our youngest daughter and son-in-law who celebrate today their 17th anniversary. Well, in the middle of those celebrations, though, we're all suffering from various forms of shortages, very minor inconveniences for some of us. Maybe you just won't get that toy that you wanted to get the kids for Christmas, or maybe you're having trouble setting your Thanksgiving table. Whatever the problem, we're all being inconvenienced by some of this right now, but it looks like it may get worse. We're going to talk about that, inflation, and some other things that are really affecting us and say, is there something biblical going on here? Well, I want to call your attention to the book of Revelation today in chapter number 6, where we read about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Now, I know people watching me may have different interpretations as to how the book of Revelation plays out. You may have a historical viewpoint of how these things have perhaps happened through history. You may have a what we call a futurist viewpoint, that everything that happens after chapter number 3 in Revelation is all going to be condensed into 7 years right at the end. Or you may have an eclectic viewpoint that says, well, Scripture has layers of fulfillment, and yes, some of these things have been fulfilled in a way that God's people have understood it because of the power of the Word of God in their lives at the time in which they lived, but there's an ultimate fulfillment coming right before Jesus comes. And you may understand the four horsemen of the apocalypse may also be a prophecy concerning Islamic terror and control over about a fourth of the earth. So with all the things that may apply to this passage, I want to just pull one of these horses out of the four horsemen apocalyptic description and read about it this morning as we look into this idea of shortages, inflation, and what can happen to the world's economy when it gets out of control, as it will be just before Jesus returns. Well, we read about this third seal opening in chapter 6, verse 5, and see these words from the Christian Standard Bible. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a set of scales in his hand. And then I heard something like a voice among the four living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil and the wine." What's he talking about? Well, it's an economic forecast that one day we'll have problems just getting the necessities of life, much less the little conveniences that we want right now. As it talks about these things, it really points us to how expensive food could get. This little bit of barley and wheat was represented by a denarius, which at that time was a day's wages. Can you imagine spending a day's wages on just enough food that this would not even feed a small family in that day? It's talking about the struggles of economic depravity. And please don't hurt the oil, most likely a reference to olive oil, although some of us keep thinking about crude oil and what's going on with that in the world today. Don't hurt the oil and the wine. In the day in which this was written, that it was given to John, something like olive oil was considered a necessity, as the very inexpensive wines that folks used in their households, that they used to supplement drinking with water, because of course it was actually a healthier way to do things because it was hard to keep water purified. And so as we look at this, we're seeing a capsule, a picture of economic devastation that can happen when soaring prices or inflation begins to come into play, and then we begin to have shortages of some of the things that we all need, the commodities that make up everyday life. Well, we're watching that happen right now, aren't we? We just heard the report that October saw the greatest inflation in a month in the United States, at least, over the past 30 years. We have to go back to around 1990 to see anything like it. It doesn't look like it's going to stop. And the folks in charge of our government seem to be clueless as to why this is happening. When you throw trillions of dollars worth of money that we don't have, which is just trillions of dollars worth of credit, into some programs that look even ridiculous on their surface, you can't expect for that not to harm the economy of your nation. And as other countries are doing the same thing, what's going to happen to us when this massive debt is piled on our future generations? Well, it's not a pretty picture, my friends. And I could talk about some of the results of that down the road, but let's talk about just short-term results. And you see, as we come to this time of the year where we're expecting to have Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, now everybody's warning us. If you've been watching their YouTube videos about it, news spots about it all over the place, how you're going to deal with the coming crisis and shortages of everything from food for your table to those gifts that you wanted to perhaps buy around Christmas. And as we struggle with all of that, it's just a precursor, some say, to even greater times of shortage. And of course, the law of supply and demand says that when something is in shorter supply, the price is going to do what? It's going to go up. I was just looking at I won't even mention the brand name. I was looking at a vehicle that I wanted to consider buying because it was a great value, would get better gas mileage, and possibly could maybe get my hands on one of those. And then found out that that particular rollout of a vehicle has been botched. They can't get their hands on all the right chips to make the particular transmission that's going in those vehicles. They have advertised and have touted and said, this is what we want you to come get at our dealership. No, there won't be any of those around till maybe next summer, the summer of 2022. And this is something that's happening across all kinds of industries right now in the world, as we seem to have a shortage of everything from food to computer chips. Well, it reminded me of something that I grew up with. Now, I know some of you know that I'm getting a bit older, and having just turned 65, I can relate back to my very first job in a Winn-Dixie grocery store in Covington, Georgia, back in the 70s. And because the 70s were so strange, very volatile, especially economic conditions, I have some very vivid memories of what happens when inflation begins to jump into your way. Working at a grocery store back in the old days where there was a price label or a stamp on every item that you purchased, we began to run into the price increases. And you might remember what that was like, especially if you worked in retail. There would come in the list every week of price changes, most all those going up. And we would have to go take something off the shelf, and wow, that can of Thrifty Made corn that was $5 for $1 last week is now going to be $4 for $88 this week. It's going to go from 20 to 22 cents. And then a couple of weeks later, well, it's going to change now to $4 for $1. It's gone to 25 cents. It seems like some of these items that we kept changing the prices on kept going up incrementally almost by the week. There were changes coming in the prices, and it would drive us crazy. You would usually have to just dedicate one or two guys to just taking a cart, putting a big produce pan on the top of it, and going down shelves with your list of shelf tags, changing the price on everything, which back then, now it's just put it in the computer, right, where it's scanned. But instead, in those days, we had to pull out every product, take the old price off, and put the new price on. And then what was frustrating is just a few weeks down the road, we'd be doing it with the same product all over again. That's what happens when inflation begins to take hold. And in those nightmare days, some of you too young to remember this, interest rates on money, if you wanted to buy a house, began to skyrocket as well. Right now, our interest rates are so low, and it's like you can borrow money for almost nothing when it comes to a mortgage if you can find a house at a decent price. Well, back then, the prices began to skyrocket. Not only was real estate going up, but I remember having to take out a mortgage on a home when we moved to Valdosta to start the Perimeter Road Baptist Church, in which I was paying 11.5% interest and thought I got a good deal. So, friends, this is what can happen when all of your life begins to be affected by these particular influences. Well, I want to call your attention to something that I think was quite prophetic. Back in the 1970s, one of my favorite Christian groups was the Imperials. The Imperials were kind of a cutting-edge contemporary Christian group for the day. They wouldn't be considered that today, but back in the day, they were just right on the edge of great new Christian music. The guys that were singing in the mid-70s in that group came from literally 4 different cultural backgrounds: Sherman Andrus, Terry Blackwood, Jim Murray, and Armand Morales. And they had a great fit, a great chemistry, shall we say, when it comes to gospel music. Their Grammy-winning album of the mid-70s was entitled No Shortage. It featured a song that literally talked about the shortages and what was happening during that time. I want you to listen to the lyrics. No, I will not sing it for you. I want you to listen to the lyrics and think how this could almost have been written for what's going on today. It says there's a shortage on corn and there's a shortage on wheat. There's a shortage on beans. We've got a shortage on meat. Things that we've needed, we just can't hardly buy. Soon we'll be asking if we're all going to die. But I know a great thing there's no shortage of. There's no shortage on God's mercy. There's no shortage on God's love. Now, there's a shortage on fuel oil. There's a shortage on gas. There's a shortage on wood. And there's a shortage on glass. Things that we wasted are now precious to buy. You know, there's even a shortage on the air and the sky. But I know a good thing there'll be no shortage of. There's no shortage on God's mercy. There's no shortage on God's love. God is love and mercy unending. His precious love will leave you no doubts. When from Satan you need defending, God has a supply that will never run out. Now, there's a shortage on friendships. There's a shortage on smiles. There's a shortage on neighbors, though there's millions for miles. But heaven's the one thing there'll be no shortage of, because there's no shortage on God's mercy. There's no shortage on God's love. Now, you can still hear this song. You can pick it up just about everywhere. You can get it on Amazon Music. Listen, I had the 8-track tape of that particular album. Yes, playing in an 8-track tape player in our car at home that was entitled No Shortage, one of their great albums from back then. But, you know, you could go through almost every line of that song and pick out a news item from this week that's talking about those shortages. Even when it said there's a shortage on wood, how do you have a shortage on wood? Yeah, we're hearing how in some cities, because of supply chain problems, those who want to put wood in their fireplace or in a wood stove or something to help heat their home are going to have a hard time getting a hold of firewood. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, folks. And here we are in a nation that just a year ago was totally energy independent. Yet we've had a new administration in Washington that's now making no secret about the fact they're attacking the fossil fuel industry. And as a result, your gas prices are going up, your heating oil prices are going up. It's going to be more expensive to heat your home this winter. And all the things that are made with those fossil fuels, which folks think it's just gas you put in your car. I'm sorry, this covers almost all the industries of everything that we make and use every day, even medicines, even the little containers that you get your fast food hamburger in, all made courtesy of fossil fuels. And now we're being told that, well, the prices on all these things will have to go up, or we'll have to find alternatives, and you better do it fast because there's going to be a shortage on all of it. You know, as we look at these type things happening in our life, we see the impact of it. I remember living through the impact of the 70s and what was happening then. It was not pleasant, but we made it. One of the reasons we made it is there's no shortage on God's mercy, and there's no shortage on God's love, and He saw us through. So friends, as you're struggling now with the things that you can't get your hands on, that you are not going to be able to buy, you think, for this fall, just remember, plan with wisdom. Look towards the Lord and the direction of the Scripture as to how you can plan for your family. Don't get caught up in, fretting over the things that aren't necessities and thinking, oh, woe is me, I'm not going to be able to get the boat I wanted or something. We can really fret over things that don't matter. But instead, we need to plan and prepare to take our families through tough times, because it's quite obvious that the people who are in charge of the world right now are steering it in the wrong direction. But Jesus said that was exactly what would happen before he returns. Now, we're going to bring this into perspective with a lot of the other things Jesus predicted that would happen in the end times, including the pestilences, the plagues, the other issues that are coming down the pipe. And we're going to hit some of those in future episodes. But right now, my friends, think about what you can do to just seriously plan and prepare and be the family of God that you need to be during these tough times, because they are not going to, there may be some ups and downs of the way they wave back and forth, but before Jesus comes, they're not going to get better. We're going to instead see worse situations happening all around us. I was reminded of that this week as we're suffering from what Eric Steckelbeck calls the Afghanistan effect. Now, if you don't already watch his newscasts about what's going on in the Middle East, you ought to check it out. But because as a government, we, number one, abandoned Afghanistan, walked away from it, left people that are still trapped there. We've tried to appease the world's largest terror nation, Iran. Then all of a sudden, we shouldn't be surprised when things happen just like what happened on Wednesday of this week, when our embassy in Yemen was attacked. Hardly even a blip on the mainstream news media's line this week, not paying any attention to it. That embassy was attacked. Much of the products there were stolen. Many of our folks had already been evacuated away from there a long time ago when the Houthi rebels who orchestrated this attack were declared a terrorist organization. Well, one of the first things Joe Biden did when he came into office was to remove that designation to try to appease them, as he has been trying to do with many of these terrorist groups. How's that working out for us? Well, these Houthis, who are vicious terrorists, they use child soldiers, they torture and kill at will to try to get their way, and they have attacked this embassy and taken hostage almost 200 of the locals that worked there on behalf of the United States of America. They've released some of those, but still hold some captive. And the only thing our government has done so far is to issue a strongly worded statement demanding that they return all the stuff they stole. Now, how's that going to work for us? Friends, you can't make this stuff up. We are right now doing everything to empower the enemies of good for evil. And just stepping back and saying, why is all this happening? It's the same reason that we looked at, if you haven't already seen Tucker Carlson's latest expose on what's going on in Chicago. You've got murders, over 800 this year in Chicago, many being committed by criminals who've been released early on bail, and because of these new liberal policies on releasing dangerous criminals who've gone right back out and killed more people, and yet they don't seem to grasp what's going on. Right there at the University of Chicago, where they had a big movement to defund the police, try to stop the campus police from even existing at the University of Chicago, they've had 4 students shot this year. How's that working out for you, friends? You don't want police to protect you, and instead, you're just getting pure lawlessness. Well, remember what the Bible said would happen before Jesus comes. There would be a rise in lawlessness, Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse, and it points to a man the Apostle Paul calls the man of lawlessness that's going to be in charge during that time. Oh, friends, listen, you can't make this stuff up. We are walking the path right toward everything that the Bible said would happen in these days. So what are you to do? Just remember that when the shortages are giving you problems in your shopping list, remember, just as the Imperials sang in the 70s, there's no shortage on God's mercy. There's no shortage on God's love. Those neighbors and friends that it talks about there's a shortage of, that's what's happening right now as people just kind of closed in on themselves. They don't talk to each other. It talked about a shortage of smiles. You mask everybody up. You can't even see if they're smiling anymore. And they wrote this in the 1970s. Friends, that's a song needs to come back. You look it up and listen to it and tell me if you don't think the same thing. You might want to maybe change the way the music goes a little bit to make it fit our day. But the truth is still there in that song. When all the shortages are coming home to roost, you just remember, there's no shortage on God's mercy. There's no shortage on God's love. And I'll see you tomorrow as we get into message number 2 in our Jonah series from First Baptist Winsboro, and then each and every day as we wake up in God's Word. I'll see you then.